Happy Massee is the production designer on Armageddon Time. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Happy, I wanted to start by asking you, since Armageddon Time is a period film set in 1980, what is your favorite aspect of the kind of aesthetic of the 1980s?
In general, or is particular to this movie?
In general, because we'll dive into some of the specifics about the film in a little while.
I mean, it's interesting because I don't necessarily associate the 80s with a period piece because it just doesn't feel that long ago for me. I don't know, for some reason, it just feels like it was yesterday. But and especially since I've done some true period pieces. I've done, The Immigrant with James, which took place in the 20s. And then I've just, during the pandemic, I did a series of shows for the History Channel on American presidents. And we did Lincoln, we did Teddy, and we did FDR. So those to me are like true period pieces. So when this came around and they said the 80s, it was like, okay, well, except for a few nightclubs that aren't around anymore, and and bike lanes, nothing's really changed. And then then when you pause and think about it, it is 42 years ago, so it is a period piece technically. And I think the challenge for me, I mean, it wasn't a challenge, but what I liked about the idea of doing a movie that took place in the 80s is I moved to New York pretty much in the 80s. And so, I didn't have to do too much research. The research were my personal experiences. And, and so I sort of relived something that I lived when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And speaking of working with James Gray, you mentioned a minute ago, The Immigrant. This is, I believe, your third feature with James. Just talk about collaborating with James. What do you love about your partnership on screen, and what's your process like working together?
It's it's interesting. I mean, obviously three movies in, we're a lot closer. We know each other a lot better. I always say, when you do a movie with James, but when you do any movie, you hear about the project and then it sort of goes away for a year and then it comes back and you have like 30 days to put it together, and so my first project with James, which was Two Lovers, he had asked me to do We Own the Night, but I something conflicted with the schedule, and once they were ready to shoot it, I couldn't do it. But so we did Two Lovers was our first movie, and he invited me over for dinner and cooked a bowl of his famous spaghetti and meatballs, and just started telling me just about his life, his experience, his likes, his dislikes, his passions, just everything, and then he got into more specifics, colors and referencing movies and everything that influences all his movies. And then right at the end he said, now I've told you all of this, now you just take it, you can even throw it out the window, I don't care, do whatever you want, which was kind of nice, because he gave me a set of guidelines, but he didn't, it's not like working with some directors that are just like, I want you to do exactly this, and I mean, not, they don't want me to do exactly this, but I end up really working and trying to develop their ideas, whereas James gives you the freedom to do, to bring your, your talent, your job, whatever, to the table, and it's really, it's great working with him. It was great work doing Two Lovers, which was, set in the 2000s. However, it did feel sort of like a period piece in the sense that, those apartments that we designed, weren't, like he was telling me, they were designed in the 80s, and then nothing changed really from the 80s until 2000s. And it's, then we did The Immigrant, which was, obviously period. We do a lot more research for that. And then, but by the time this movie came around, it just felt like the only aspect that was different from, for instance, Two Lovers, is that it was a personal story. And we had to, I had to sort of, as much as he gave me a lot of freedom, I also had to to be very mindful and careful and really sort of create James's world, you know, as he knows it, not as we know it, but as he knew it, you know. So we were very lucky that he was able to provide us, you know, tons of slides that we then had to digitize, you know, so that we could actually see what, you know, his references, because they were all in slide format. And you know, and so we did the best we could, you know, to sort of recreate his world, because what I really wanted to do was design a set that James would walk onto and feel at home and not have to worry about anything, that he could really focus on, you know, directing his actors. But it's great working with James, you know, it's just like, you know, it's, you know, there's so much freedom, and him and I just have this understanding, you know, we really get along, you know, visually. So I think.
Yeah, and you were just mentioning kind of creating a home for James to work in, quite literally, you know, recreating James Gray's childhood home as best you could for the film. And you talked a little bit about that process. So I wanted to ask you, what are your favorite kind of details that you were able to kind of see in the materials he gave you and then recreate? Are there certain touches in the Graff household that you really just are so pleased with and love how they turned out?
Yeah, there are a lot of, you know, I mean, obviously there was a lot you know, there was a lot of information, and at the same time there wasn't a lot of information, because even though we had hundreds of slides, you know, they were very dark and we couldn't really discern what was what and whatever. I got, you know, a good idea of what, you know, the tones were. However, you know, and there was a lot of art, you know, we saw a lot of art in these pictures. So, you know, and that was very important, you know, to James, you know, that we nailed the art as much as we could. But, you know, James is, you know, and I pay a lot of attention to detail, very close attention to detail. And it's like, you know, even those little blue pill boxes, you know, the weekly pill boxes, everything like that, you know, we wanted to, you know, really nail, so that, you know, any shot has something where you go, oh my God, you know, and it's not over the top either, you know, but it's just, you know, it's really well thought out, you know. His bedroom and his brother's bedroom, you know, the model airplanes, and, you know, there was so much more, I feel, in the movie. I mean, in reality, than you actually see in the movie. But, you know, all the model airplanes that we made, you know, and he knew exactly which plane that he wanted, so we had to find them because they don't make them anymore. But so that was a little tricky, you know, and I was really trying to really nail everything, you know, even though James and I don't like to use that word, we nailed it, you know, we just wanted to try to get as close as possible to, you know, his world, you know, like the lampshade over the dining room table is exactly the one that was over his dining room table, you know, the wallpapers were very close to the wallpapers that were in the existing home. And, you know, the only guideline that I had for that, because it was, you know, he drew, you know, sort of a rough floor plan of what the house looked like. And then obviously, you know, it was row housing in Queens, and we ended up shooting in a single family home in Jersey. So we had to sort of redesign the house in a way that it looked like a row housing from Queens. But the main thing, and this is the key word or words that he gave me, he said Archie Bunker, you know, that's all in the family, which I got right away. And the difficult part was telling my crew, who had no idea what All in the Family was. You know, they had to go look at a couple episodes to get it.
Well, that's unbelievable. Speaking of art, you mentioned, you know, artwork played such an important role in at least what you saw in James's photographs and tried to recreate. The film shot at the Guggenheim. So I wanted to ask you about your involvement in that process. What was it like, and what kind of set dressing did you have to do? There's a fantasy sequence set there, which is really wonderful. So what was it like working at the Guggenheim and shooting there too?
Well, I'd like to say that I can take credit for the Kandinskys, but no, I can't take credit for anything, to be honest with you. I mean, the movie originally was going to be set at the Met. I mean, those scenes were set at the Met, and it was going to be a Hopper exhibition. And we couldn't get the Met. We got the Guggenheim. However, we had to not settle, because I think it's a major step up to do Kandinsky. And so they had just finished installing, when we scouted the museum, they were actually hanging the show. And then we shot on a Tuesday night when the museum is dark, and we just shot everything, and we didn't change anything. We couldn't touch anything. It was a limited crew in the museum. We couldn't get any closer than 20 feet from any painting. I mean, it was literally like, except that, obviously there's that one scene when Paul just goes up and stares at the painting and he's really close, but that was it. Otherwise, we couldn't really do anything. And then, the hero for the scene, his dream sequence, since we were going to do Kandinsky, I picked, sort of Kandinsky-esque colors, the vibrant greens and pinks and stuff like that, and sort of tried to recreate something. He wanted a superhero. We couldn't, we had to draw our own. And so I just told my scenic artist, to recreate something using the colors of Kandinsky paintings.
Yeah, that works really well. You mentioned a moment ago too, Paul's bedroom and what you were thinking about kind of designing that young boy's, based on James Gray, his room. We also get a very brief scene, but very telling, I think, scene in Johnny's house. That's Paul's friend Johnny, which has to convey a lot. I mean, it's the only time we kind of see him and his grandmother together, and what his living condition is like. So talk about bringing that space to life. What did James want, and what did you kind of envision for that fleeting moment, but really important?
It's interesting because it's interesting that you mentioned that, because like many locations, they were found like literally 2 days before, and this location was right across the street from the pawn shop. We had to marry a location to the pawn shop. And so we found this apartment, and it was for rent. And they had just finished redoing the entire place. You could still smell the fresh paint. They'd done the floors. It was a little one bedroom in Jersey, with really bad sort of Home Depot cabinets, but we found there was this one room, and the window was in the right place, and so we managed to get it, and we just destroyed it. My scenics came in and painted, and they did that plaster. They did an incredible job, to the point where James's editor saw those scenes, the next day, and he was like, "Oh my God, this is like the most beautiful scene in the movie." And like you say, it's a fleeting scene in the final cut. We shot way more. You see him walk in, and you just see the whole room, and that was just based on, I think it was a Robert Frank photograph or something. I can't remember exactly who was the influence, but it was, I love that scene, and I'm glad you bring it up, because no one, really noticed it, but a lot of work went into that, and it was kind of perfect.
Yeah, no question. It like I said, it really conveys so much about, Johnny's life and what we haven't seen but have heard about. Paul and Johnny meet in school, and I want to ask you about the schools that you chose and shot in, for first the public school and then the private school, which are obviously so different. We learned so much about the class and social differences between the two schools. But aside from just picking the locations, what went into really kind of accentuating those differences, because obviously so much hinges on Paul kind of entering an entirely different world than he knows.
Well, it's interesting, I mean, I'm going to be divulging way more information than I should, but when you say, the difference in the schools, well, ironically, both schools in our movie are shot in the same school in New Jersey. We found this high school in Bayonne, and it's the biggest high school in New Jersey. It has something like 4,000 students, and there are different wings to the school. So there's obviously sort of a slightly more modern wing, and then there's the older wing. And I spent like a week scouting it, first of all, trying to wrap my head around the school. It was so big, and so many different floors, and so many different classrooms, that literally it took me like a good week to sort of figure out the school. And I sort of mapped it all out, and I found one area where it's the public school, where you've got all those sort of wood paneling, the closets, the windows, everything kind of worked. And then in another wing, you have the slightly more modern school, which is the wing that was built, I guess, in the 80s or something, where we did the computer rooms, where they end up stealing the computer. Ironically, where you have the hallways where he meets Fred Trump, which is in, you know, the private school, that's in the older section of the school. So we mixed everything up and we made it, you know, we made it work. You know, I felt like the school where the computer was stolen, the classroom where the computer was stolen from, I felt was maybe not aesthetically appropriate. And James was like, no, this is exactly the way it was. And sure enough, we did actually go scout his high school. And it looked very much, you know, the part, you know.
One more location question for you. Another kind of short scene, but important scene, and had a lot of, I'm sure, set dressing from top to bottom, was that scene in the subway cars. Just talk about bringing, you know, a 40-something-year-old subway to life for the film.
Again, you know, so you know, we, as you do when you shoot in New York, you know, you go through the MTA, you know, and you go through their museum and they have the older subway cars. They don't have the actual strap hanger cars. The oldest subway car is the one that we ended up using. And so we, you know, and we only had it for a period of 4 hours to shoot in. And within those 4 hours, we had to dress it. So we got there, I guess, an hour early, you know, waited for a good hour because the MTA is always slow and they're on their own schedule. And so they were late by an hour. And I had, like, I think maybe a dozen scenic artists just standing by, you know, and we had all the artwork, all the old Eastern Airline posters and Spam posters and the Bahamas posters and Adirondack horse track posters. We had all of those waiting, standing by. And then what we had done, because we wanted to do the graffiti, we weren't allowed to paint on the actual subway car. So what we were going to do is we were going to skin the walls of the subway car with this thing called frisket paper, which is basically clear paper, and then paint over that. And so we came in, we started putting all our posters, the stickers, you know, the no spitting, no radio playing. And just as we started doing the graffiti, this woman comes in and goes, "You can't do that. We don't want our, you know, our subways to be misrepresented," and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, they put the kibosh on that. And so I hate to admit it, I would love to take credit for it, but all the graffiti was done in CGI afterwards. And they did an amazing job. I mean, I've never seen something like that because, you know, there's movement to the camera and it's unbelievable.
Of all of the kind of inside scoop we're getting on this, I mean, the school, you know, I'm shocked to hear that it's the, you know, different wings of the same school and intermixed. Just incredible work on the subway, on the house, on the school, across the film. Happy Massee, congratulations on Armageddon Time, and
Thank you so much.
thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you very much.